Today's daf is daf Tesvav, and we're going to begin with Rav Papa Omar. The Gemara had asked the Kasha Stira from our Mishnah, which indicates that Torres comes first and then Hatovas Haneros second, whereas the Mishnah later on daf Chafhei indicates that Hatovas Haneros come first and then Ktores. Abai had given an answer that our Mishnah is talking about the last two Neros, and therefore the Ktores comes before Hatovas Haneros, whereas the Mishnah later on daf Chafhei is talking about the five Neros, the first five, and that's why the Mishnah assumes that Hatovas Haneros comes before Ktores. But although they're each referring to a different set of Neros, they're saying exactly the same thing, namely that you begin Hatovas Haneros with five, then you maktir the Ktores, and then you complete the Hatovas Haneros with the last two. The oddity about the Seder HaMishnais, according to Abai's presentation, is that the first Mishnah, which is our Mishnah, is talking about the last two Neros. And then the later Mishnah goes back, L'mafreya, retroactively to the first five Neros. That's a little bit odd. So therefore, Rav Papa offers an alternative reconciliation of these two Mishnayos. He says, Lo kasha, ha-rabbanon, ha-abashol. Our Mishnah that says that the Torres comes first, before Hatovas Haneros, that reflects the sheet of the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon hold that we make an interruption after the first five Hatovos, the first five Neros, and then we're maktir the Ktores, and only afterwards do we do the Hatov on the last two Neros. The Mishnah later on, which has Hatovas Haneros before Ktores, that reflects the sheet of Abashol, and he holds that Haktores is only implemented after the Hatovas Shiva Neros, all the seven Neros. The Gemara raises the following objection to Rav Papa's reconciliation. Kirabanon, you're telling me that our Mishnah here is reflective of the Shitas Chachamim. The Mishnah later on, which is dealing with the pious, and that's the Mishnah Daf Chafhei. And the Mishnah holds that Hatovas Haneros comes before the Ktores. That means all seven Neros. Is Ke'aba Shol, Amos Sefer. Let's take a look at the last of this sequence of Mishnayos. The latest and the last is on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. A vilo they brought to the Kohen Gadol Es HaTamid on Yom Kippurim. Kroto. He begins the shechita by cutting rov shnayim, most of the two simonim, the kana and the veshet and the vochet, and then he gives over the animal, the tamid, over to a kohen hedjo to complete the shechita, which frees up his hands in order to be makabel the dam, because all the avodas have to be done by the kohen gadol, umerik, and now that kohen hedjo will complete. Acher means the other Kohen. The Shechita al Yodo. Al Yodo means on behalf of the Kohen Gadol. And then, after the Talmud is complete, Nichnas, the Kohen Gadol, enters into the Heichal, Lahaktir es Haktores, Ulehetiv es Haneros. It seems clear that Haktores Haktores comes before the Hatovas Haneros. Now comes out the following. According to Rav Papa, the very first Mishnah, our Mishnah here on Daf Yud Dalid, that reflects the sheet of the Chachamim, and that's why Haktores comes before the Hatov of the last two Neros. The last Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph with the pious also reflects the Shita of the Rabbanon, that the pious of the Ktores comes before Hatovas Haneros, which means before the last two Neros. And now we have a Mishnah in between, which is on Daf Chav Hey, and that Mishnah clearly reflects, according to Rav Papa, the Shita of Abshol, that Aktoras is after Hatovas HaNeros, meaning after the Hatov of all 5 Neros. So the Gemara now objects. The Gemara says, Reisha v'Seifa Rabbanon u'Metziasa Abshol. Very odd structure here in the Mishnayos, where Mishnah number 1, that's our Mishnah on Daf Yud, is the Rabbanon. Mishnah number 3 on Daf Lamed Aleph is Rabbanon, but right there, wedged in the middle on Daf Chaf Hey, is the Mishnah of Abishol, a different sheet entirely, in which Aktoras comes only after the entire set of Hatovas HaNeros. I'm not nispal from that. It doesn't bother me. Reisha v'Sefer Rabbanon u'Metzias Abishol. This is not the first case in which the Mishnayos are organized, each Mishnah reflecting a different shita, and sometimes later Mishnayos go back to reflect the original shita. Now the Gemara wants to know, why is it that Abai rejects Rav Papa and vice versa? I understand why Abai has problems with Rav Papa. This is a very odd Seder HaMishnayos, where the middle shita of Abishol is wedged, sandwiched between 2 Mishnayos that reflect the Rabban. Elo, Rav Papa, my time Elo Omar, Ke Abaye. What is it about Abaye's shita that Rav Papa found objectionable? Abaye had reconciled these 2 Mishnayos, the one on Yudalit and the one on Chafei, by saying it all depends whether you're talking about 2 Neros or 5 Neros. Elo Rav Papa, my time Elo Omar Ke Abaye, Rav Papa is going to tell you, Tana Bereisha Hatovas Shtei Neros v'Hadar Hatovas Chamish Neros. In the Seder HaMishnayos, it seems to be going backwards, starting with the first Mishnah, which is on Daf Yudalit. And that Mishnah is referring, when it says that the Ketores comes before the Hatovas HaNeros, it's referring to the last 2 Neros, and the Ketores comes before the last 2 Neros. And then we go on to the Mishnah Daf Chaf Hey, and the Mishnah seems to insist that Hatovas HaNeros comes before Aktoras HaToras. That's a reference to the first 5 Neros. So you began in the earlier Mishnah with the last 2 Neros, and then you went back to the first 5 Neros. That's not a logical sequence. Hence, Rav Papa rejected Abaye. So this is really a challenge to Abaye to try to justify that the Mishnah would go from 2 Neros and then backwards to the 5 Neros. Abaye would say, Oruye bi alma hudika mori. What it means is that there's a fundamental difference between the Mishnah on Daf Yudalid and the other Mishnayos, which come later in the later prakim of Yoma. The first Mishnah, in the first parak, when I say the first Mishnah, I mean the first of this sequence of Mishnayos on Daf Yudalid, is Aruye Hudika Mori. He's coming to teach us that during the 7 days prior to Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol is quarantined in order to get used to doing the avodah, these are the avodos that he has to be trained in. It's not a seder. The significance and the agenda here of the first parak of Mishnayos is the preach of the Kohen Gadol, his training period for 1 week, not the sequence. It's not, it didn't say that. But the later Mishnayos, in the second parak, and later in the third parak, in the second parak of Daf Chaf Hey, where we find that Hatovas HaNeros is first, meaning the first 5 Neros, and then later on in Daf Lamed Aleph, where we find that the Hatova Shtei Neros are at the end, that's an agenda that has to do with Seder. At this point, beginning in the second parak and going on in the third parak of Yoma, the Tana is interested in teaching us the sequence. Gufa, the Gemara says, let's go back to study our Mishnah and compare it to a parallel Mishnah in Masechet Tamid. And we're talking now about what's called Zrikas Dam Korban HaTamid. How does the Kohen implement the zrikas dam hatomit. After all, there are 4 different corners of the Mizbeach. And how does he implement the Zrika? We have a principle called Shtayim Shein Arba, 2 matanos, 2 nesinos, that are considered like 4, meaning even though he did only 2 nesinos, it's considered as if he had placed the dam on all 4 sides of the Mizbech. And that's how it works in most karbonos, with the exception of chatos, and certainly the carbon tamid as a carbon ola requires shtayim shein arba. In the case of the chatos, we're going to see that we're talking about a different part of the mizbeach. We're going to talk about the kronos on top of the mizbeach, whereas for all other karbonos, the dam goes on the sides of the mizbeach, the kir ha-mizbeach. But in the case of chatos, he requires 4 matanos on each of the 4 kronos respectively. Bolo, the Kohen, comes after he was makabel adam lekeren mizrachis tzfonis. So if you can imagine a situation in which the Kohen, we're not talking about Yom Kippur now, the Kohen comes in through the Mizrach, he turns to the right towards the tzafon, and that is going to be the first corner on which he does the matan domin. Nosein mizrachis tzfonis. So he has now accomplished his first zrika of mizrachis tzfonis, which means that the dam will now drip over from that corner to both the mizrach and the tzafon. And now he's covered 2 out of 4 of the sides of the mizbech. At this point, he goes around the mizbeach, turning to the right, going up towards the west, and then turning left towards the south. And he gets to Maravis Dromis. Why Maravis Dromis? Because Maravis Dromis is exactly diametric. It's a diameter. If you created a diameter through the square of the mizbeach from tzfonis mizrachis, you'll end up in dromis maravis, and that's called shtayim shein arba. And that's our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Masechet Tamid. However, Tari Allah, the Brisa, records a dissenting opinion of Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. Mishana, he changes the nesinas damim of the carbon tamid b'tamid, and he holds that although I agree with the Chachamim that the first zrika is bolo lekeren mizrachis tzfonis, I agree that when he comes into the east, he turns towards the right, which means towards the north, and he does the zrika in that corner. But I'm not going to skip all the way with the diameter line to the dromis maravis, but rather nosein mizrachis tzfonis. After he does mizrachis tzfonis, then he swings around and he gets to maravis dromis, but here he's going to do 2 nesinos. One nosein marava, one towards the west, the acharkach nosein droma towards the east, on the southern side, excuse me. So now what we have is 3 nesinos. The first one is in a corner, and that corner covers both Mizrach and Safon. And now he's going to do another zrika on the west, on the Mairav, and a third zrika, excuse me, on the south, on the Durham, covering, as it were, all 4 sides of the Mizbech. My time of the Reb Shimon Ish Mitzvah. This is very strange. After all, the carbon tamid is called by the Torah an ola. It's a carbon ola in every sense, and therefore it comes under the general rule of shtayim shein arba. Why is he adding a 3rd zrika? And why does he require a separate zrika on Ma'arav and a separate zrika on Daram when he can kill 2 birds with 1 stone and do a zrika on that corner, which is west and south, southwest, right? We'll call it Maravis Dromis. and then he'll cover those two sides. Why does he need two separate zrikos? But by the way, that would be reflective of a korban chatos, because as we said before, chatos requires on all four sides. On Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Chad Bey, Rav Yanai, somebody from the school of Rav Yanai, on my Krah, the Pasuk says, with regard to the korban of Rosh Chodesh, in Parshas Pinchas, Useir izim echad lechatos lashem. We have the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh, which is a korban chatos, al olas hatamid ye'asa v'niska. Olas hatamid is a reference to the korban tamid, which is clearly called an olah, and that we understand that the korban tamid is a korban olah in all its dinim. But what does the word olav mean? Olav sounds like we're adding something to the olas hatamid, and that is something that is borrowed from chatos. We're doing almost like a grafting, and we're grafting the chatos onto the olas hatamid. Olahi ve'amar achmana ovid ve'maisa chatos. On the one hand, paradoxically, the Torah defines the essence of the korban tamid as an olah. It classifies tamid as an olah, but on the other hand, it requires olav, that which he does on a chatos. In this case, we're talking about the Sar Rosh Chodesh, but that's not relevant to us. That which he does in a chatos, the maisa chatos, the zrikas adam of a chatos, is now being interposed onto the korban olas hatamid. Haketza. How do we work this out? Says Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzvah. And the answer is no sein achas shishtayim. He begins like a classic korban olah on the northeastern corner, kemaisa olah. But then, as far as Maravis and Dromis is concerned, shtayim shein shtayim. He needs two separate zrikos, kemaisa chatos, which requires four zrikos on the four corners of the mizbeach. So the Gemara asks, "V'litein shtayim shein arba kemaisa olah, v'arba shein arba kemaisa chatos." If the Torah is saying that you take the olav and you superimpose the korban chatos and its zrika of dam onto the korban olav the tamid, then let's require both seders. We require the seder of shtayim shein arba, and then afterwards start all over again with four zrikos on four sides of the mizbeach. And the Gemara gives a very strange answer. Lo matzinu domim shemechaprim v'chozrim umechaprim. We never found in any case in the world of karbanos that you do an entire seder of zrika covering all four sides of the mizbeach and then start all over again in order to create a kapara of zrika as a repeat performance. So the Gemara immediately says the following: I don't get what you're saying. The entire enterprise of this korban tamid, according to Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, is an anomaly. It has no parallel in the world of kodshim. Two zrikos covering two sides of the mizbeach in one shot, which is shtayim shein arba, half of shtayim shein arba, and then another zrika here and another zrika here. The whole thing is brand new. It breaks new ground. El al korcha chikishan hakosuv. The Torah says that somehow that system of zrika, which we find in chatos, is applicable and must be imposed on this korban olah, which is the tamid. Therefore, chinami, if we have no choice, but according to the reading of the pasuk olav, it's a hekesh, is bal korcha kishan hakosuv, and therefore we need two full nesinos. Don't tell me we don't find such a thing in the world of kodshim. We don't find even lamaisa, the maskana. We don't find it in the world of kodshim. The Gemara answers hasam when he splits up the nesina, then it's not clear that he's doing a maisa chatas, but rather pisuk matanas bialmahi. He's making a hefsek between the first nesina of Keren Mizrachis Tzfonis, which is shtayim, And the second Nesina, which is Dromis Maravis, which is another Shtayim, and he splits it up, and he has a separate Nesina in the Myrav and a separate one on the Tzad Hadorim. So the Gemara says, Nesiv achas shtayim lemata kemaisa ola, ushtayim shem shtayim lemala kemaisa chatos. If the Torah is requiring another two zrikos that parallel and are borrowed and grafted from chatos, they should be on the top of the mizbeach, on the kronos, on the gag, on the roof of the mizbeach. And the Gemara answers, Lo matzinu domim shechetzion lamala v'chetzion lamata. Then what you're doing is you're setting up a seder of matan domim, half of which will be on the side of the mizbech lamata, and the other half will be on the top of the mizbech. We never found that combination in the world of kodshim. So the Gemara says, V'lo, I'll show you where we do have lamala lamata in zrikas dam kodshim, or tanan, a Mishnah on Daf Nun Gimel later on in Masechet Yoma, with regard to the Kodesh Kadoshim, when the Kohen goes in to do the hazas of the Damapar, it says, he's Avimeni Achas Lemala V'Sheva Lemata. So we see that there's a Zrika Lemala, and then we go ahead with the 7 Zrikos Lemata. Now, in truth, let's just point out that this comparison is not, shall we say, accurate in the sense, because we're not talking about hazah on top of something. The dam doesn't actually reach what we call the kapores in the Kodesh Kadoshim. It's only in the direction of the kapores. But the Gemara thinks, nevertheless, you see that even in terms of direction, you have a lamal lamata that integrates into one maisa hazah. So the Gemara answers, no, you made a mistake. It's kimatzlif. The Mishnah doesn't mean that he has a hazol lamala and sheva hazos lamata. What it means is kimatzlif. It all has to do with the way he keeps his hand. And you could have a hazah in which the palm is upwards, or you could have a hazah in which the palm is downwards and he pushes down. My kimatzlif, machvi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda showed it to his students. Kimnagdana, like a shliach bezdin who gives malchus, and he takes the ritzua and he goes from the upper part of the shoulder going down and down the body because he doesn't want to hit him over and over again in the same spot. And here also he's going to be mazer one lamata michaverta. No, it's going down. That which the Tana in the Mishnah says that there's a difference between the first matana and the other matanos is because the first matana was different in terms of the way he held his hand. Because with regard to the achas lamala, he would put the palm of his hand downwards and he would do a downward motion, where in the other matanos, he would go with his palm down and the back of his and the front of his hand, I guess you'd call it, up, and he would push downwards. The Gemara says below, you don't find a matan domim, which is half lamal and half lamat vatanan. We have a Mishnah later on in Yoma and Daf Nun Ches, which means that after the Kohen Gadol mixes the dama par and the dama soyer, and he does hazah on the kronos of the mizbeach hapnimi inside the heichal, he's a mimenu al taharo shel mizbeach sheva pa'amin. Now, the pasuk says that he's a al taharo shel mizbeach, the purity of the mizbeach. The Gemara thinks right now in the Havmin, my love, apalge the mizbeach, which means that keneged chetzi govo shel mizbeach. In other words, the Gemara doesn't understand that we're talking about the top of the mizbeach, but rather we're talking about the vertical side of the mizbeach, and it's keneged emtza gover, the middle of the height of the dofen of the mizbeach. That's called tahara shel mizbeach, and it means half of the mizbeach on the vertical side. Kina amri inchi, like the idiomatic phrase that people use, tar tiara, which is tsar tsarayim. Vupalga de Yoma, means half the day. Half the day is past and half the day is coming. And therefore, since he needs Azah, Keneged Govo, and that means it's not going to be possible for him to hit the middle exactly precisely. Therefore, we have no choice, but some of the dam, Miktas Adam, will be Azol Mala, above the halfway point of the vertical height of the Mizbeach, and Miksasan Lamata, Michetzi Gavoa, a little bit will be below that midpoint. So we have now a Nesinas Domim Lamala and a Nesinas Domim Lemata.